I've been using the S26 Ultra for a couple of weeks now, and to be honest, while it's generally been quite nice to use in my experience, so many people on the internet, because it's the internet, can't stop complaining about one thing or another when it comes to this or pretty much any other mainstream flagship on the market. We play the same song and dance every single year. But here's the thing, those criticisms, while understandable from an enthusiast perspective, sort of miss the bigger picture on what a flagship phone actually is, especially in the tough tech times of 2026. So let's dig into the question of why are mass market flagships like the S26 Ultra and iPhone 17 Pro the way they are. The perspective on this really starts with us. If I asked any singular viewer watching this video right now, what do you want in a flagship phone? I bet you'd have a pretty solid list. That might include performance that doesn't stutter, cameras that make your photos look incredible, battery life that lasts a day, or maybe two. I know a lot of you in the comments are gonna say micro SD card slot. Look, the list can go on and on and on. If all of us tech enthusiasts got together and designed the perfect smartphone, I hate to say it, but it would probably end up a disaster. Not because our ideas are bad, but rather because we would want everything, which would mean a phone that would actually cost way more than we'd like to pay. Which is to say, flagship phone brands have to do the same sort of dance that we end up doing in real life anyway, picking and choosing what gets top priority, what features get downgraded or taken out in order to meet realistic price points and production targets. And yes, there will certainly be that constant push and pull between what the consumer wants and what the businesses actually end up dishing out into the market. But genuinely, I do think that both sides do agree on the fact that hitting most of these pillars are often what makes a phone worth that flagship price tag, because that's where the value is. But also, here's where things get a little complicated. Especially as someone that makes videos on consumer tech for a living, I see a lot of discourse on smartphones. No singular smartphone out there will please everyone. But let's break that down. First of all, we all weigh things differently. Some people prioritize camera quality over everything else, while a good amount of folks out there just genuinely don't care about specs and want a phone that just feels premium and has a recognizable brand name on it. That's just human nature. We're all looking for different things. But on top of that, secondly, and this is a tricky one, brands always try to factor in what people might not necessarily know they want yet. Whether we realize it or not, users gravitate towards phones and features that actually surprise and excite them, that make us go, oh wow, I didn't know I needed that. However, the asterisk here is that you can only hope that these features are actually useful to us. Not just some gimmick that works for like 10 seconds in a demo, then you never touch it again. So with all this being said, let's actually put that into context with this, the Galaxy S26 Ultra. To catch y'all up, Samsung's newest flagship is more or less an evolutionary upgrade, which might as well just be business as usual from Samsung. It's got a familiar and simple design covered in glass and metal, powered by the top-of-the-line Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 SoC, has 65-watt charging, and features the S Pen, which is still here carrying on that Galaxy Note DNA even in 2026. Anyone that follows the progression on the Galaxy S product line probably wouldn't bat an eye at this if it wasn't for the fact that Samsung actually threw a couple of features that I at least genuinely consider to be useful innovations. The big one you probably heard about is privacy display. Basically, it's a feature built directly into the screen on a per pixel basis that cuts the viewing angle of your screen so that people to your sides can't sneak a peek at what you're doing. Probably my favorite thing about it is that not only can you toggle it on or off, but also set parameters on how it works automatically, per app, time of day, even geolocation, or just to hide your notifications from view. It is a really clever trick, and while there are some trade-offs, like when you turn it on, it cuts about half the screen brightness and resolution to pull the effect off, at the end of the day, I actually ended up being fine with it. And yes, this is even in light of the sort of controversy that Samsung got themselves into, and even some of the compromises people have pointed out online compared to last year's model. But to be honest, with how much I've been leaning on privacy display, these are trade-offs that I can live with. Another headlining feature that might seem sort of gimmicky on the surface, but could be useful in some scenarios, is horizon lock in video. Not only will it keep your K-pop fan cams framed straight while jumping up and down at a concert, but because it keeps your horizon level, even if the phone is rotated a full 360 degrees, you can do it like strap it to the wheel of your car to get insanely stable footage. Now, is privacy display or horizontal lock killer revolutionary features that will sell the phone? No! Absolutely not. But in context, these are the kind of additions that are extra bits of interest that add flavor to an otherwise straightforward flagship experience. I can tell you, as someone that looks at a lot of these devices every single day in the office, if I try a feature and actually miss it when hopping between devices, that's how I know it left a real impression. And especially at a time when component costs are climbing and it's getting harder and harder to justify adding anything new, especially if you're Samsung making these phones. Having genuinely useful features like these that actually do spark some consumer interest are things that I don't think we should be taking for granted. Not trying to be a corpo apologist, but credit where credit's due. Okay, but here's the thing that I think most of us, including myself from time to time, don't really think about when we're shopping around for smartphones. The features that make it into a phone like this, they're not just about what's technically possible, but also what can be done to mass produce this at scale. Entertaining that thought a bit more, a reason why a phone like the S26 Ultra or iPhone 17 Pro are the way they are, zoom out for a second and look at the actual smartphone market. In 2025, Apple and Samsung combined accounted for about 39% of all global smartphone sales. That is nearly 4 out of every 10 phones sold in the planet. And as such, when other companies are designing their flagships, they're looking at both the iPhone and Galaxy S, asking themselves, how do we match this? Which is why we're able to see some genuinely exciting phones come out of China. Devices that are trying to outspec, outfeature, out everything from the vanilla flagships of Apple and Samsung in hopes of offering more perceived value to sway users to their side. At MWC 2026, for example, one standout for me was the Lights phone, a co-branded effort between Xiaomi and premium camera brand Leica. On top of having flagship phone specs, it heavily focuses on photography. 1-inch camera sensor, a physical mechanical ring for controlling zoom, exposure, shutter speed, really nice tactile controls that you'd find on, say, a dedicated camera. And of course, it has Leica's signature color science baked in to make photos look absolutely mint. It also does cost like 2,000 euros or about $2,400 because Leica tax. However, in the grand scheme of things, for all of the hype and excitement these Chinese flagship phones bring, even though they're vying for the same clientele as iPhone and Galaxy S, these devices are practically in a different plane of existence, at least when it comes to both positioning and marketing. Yes, enthusiasts love them because they're proof of what's possible when you throw caution to the wind and push the envelope as far as it can go in order to add value. However, in the case of both Samsung and Apple, they are simply playing a different game, building for a mass market that they already know buys their product. We're talking about the person that walks into the Carrier store on their lunch break and just wants a phone that works. Hell, this is a minor point, but I feel like brands such as Xiaomi and Huawei like to change their design language frequently to where, sure, there's visual interest, but me as the consumer, I have no sense of what their actual brand ID is on their phones. So you can make the argument that with Samsung and Apple, what you see is what you get, and there's inherent value in that. Now, we could make the assessment that Samsung could actually push the envelope more with the Galaxy S line if they really wanted to, and yeah, you would be right. But rather, instead of putting all of their eggs in one basket, they invest in a side quest. Foldables. Like it or not, they invest tons of resources and R&D into making these things better and better every single year. The screens, hinges, the software optimization for these weird aspect ratios. None of that is easy. And the funny part is that while I like to think this venture is optional, Samsung are actually winning in more ways than one to justify these things existing. Samsung Display, the division that actually makes these foldable panels, already sell the components to other brands, but that didn't happen overnight. Samsung's mobile division uses the Galaxy Z line as a proving ground, manufacturing at scale, working out the kinks in real-world conditions, and the result is that Samsung alone have sold roughly 60 million foldable devices over the last 5 or 6 years, with the most recent recent Galaxy Z Fold 7 doing surprisingly well on the market. So yeah, the side quests seem to be working out, and it is good to see Samsung experimenting. But as for the main flagship product, the one that tens of millions of people buy every single year, that one has to do continuously well. And by virtue of that, it has to be easy to market as well, so that carriers will want to keep shilling it in stores, so that it can live up to the expectations of the moms and dads that want to buy it. So what are you actually paying for with these phones? Not necessarily the bleeding edge, not the wildest specs or most experimental features. You are paying for ecosystem. You are paying for the software support. The fact that when something goes wrong, you're able to walk into a store and get it fixed. You're paying for the peace of mind that this thing will get updates for the next 7 or so years. Even little things like your case options are endless, and every app is likely optimized for your phone first. Stuff like that, all of the little things we don't think about are what make up value. It's not flashy, it won't get tech Twitter excited, but it's real stuff. Though, most importantly, what matters at the end of the day is that we still have plenty of fun options on the market to choose from if the most mass-produced options aren't necessarily cutting it for you. But if there's something I'd like you to take away from this video, it's that it's actually okay to like these boring flagships sometimes, especially if you want something straightforward and something that just works well out of the box. Not every purchase needs to be a statement. Sometimes a phone just needs to be a phone, and that's fine.